one of my hypotheses for why the best companies in Silicon Valley, and frankly, the best companies in the world, you look at LVMH or any of these companies, have a
Sure.
core set of people that have been there for a very long time, is not because those people are a club and blah, blah, blah. It is actually because there are very few people that have seen the world change really, really fast altogether.
Yeah.
So if you are with a group of 5, 10, 15, 20 people that you've grown up with at DoorDash that are some of my best friends, and all of you saw us go from 10,000 deliveries on a Friday to over 2 billion deliveries in a year, you now believe the acorn can be a redwood.
All right, Toby, welcome to the pod. Great to have you. I want to start by just introducing you, and maybe you could tell our guests a little bit about who you are and
Yeah,
how you made your way to DoorDash over time. What I'm
totally.
particularly interested in is a lot of people can look you up on LinkedIn and find your professional trajectory. So anything that's sort of
Yeah,
not on LinkedIn would be, I
yeah,
think, also really interesting.
totally. So, by way of introduction for the audience, Eric and I went to grad school together, good buddies at Stanford. Before that, I grew up in Palo Alto, played water polo at Brown, worked in financial services, came back to grad school, had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do. I understood the general concept of, people always talking about building and selling as kind of two meta concepts with building or kind of in within Silicon Valley and companies. I didn't necessarily think that I was either of those things because I wasn't necessarily an engineer by trade. I was a South Asian studies and economics major, so I loved writing and I loved history and I loved problem solving, but I didn't translate language into code. So I wasn't a software engineer. I wasn't a hardware engineer, mechanical engineer, electrical engineer. And sales is kind of an amorphous concept because you're not really told growing up that you're a salesperson. And in fact, I think most of us are kind of told generally that we are not supposed to be salespeople. Salespeople are kind of a strange, thing with a traveling from city to city with a bag. And
Almost
so
avoid them, right, to some degree.
you're supposed to avoid them. You're supposed to run from them. You're supposed to, when they
Yeah,
ring your doorbell, not answer. When they give you a phone call, you call it
yeah,
spam. And
yeah,
so,
exactly.
and so generally, all of society is wired to not do sales. And so when I was graduating from grad school, I think I was trying to find any possible thing I could do that wasn't sales. And I applied to 15 different technology companies, of which I thought would be successful. 15 of them denied me. One of them, when they denied me, felt wrong. I felt morally offended that they denied me, and that was DoorDash. And so I applied two more times. And on the third go, I got a job. And that job was launching. It was launching new markets. If you go back to 2015, which is 9 years ago when I joined the company, was applying to the company, DoorDash was probably the 50th largest food delivery company in the United States. Nobody knew what it was. Um, to say that I thought that I would be there for 9 years and we would have the run that we did is a complete and utter farce and lie. I thought I would join, quote unquote, be an operator for a while and then go get a fancy dancy investment job. Um, Instead, I joined I joined as a launcher. My job was turning on new markets across the country. Um, what that meant was tactically, it wasn't glorious. It meant my mom dropping off her 25-year-old son at the airport, being like, "What in the world is this person going off to do?" Landing in Phoenix in the dead of summer, selling restaurants, sleeping on an air mattress in the office, and working, taking about 12 hours, 14 hours a week off uh, as kind of our luxury. And that's what I did for about 9 months before I found one of the cool initial product market fits that I fell in love with, which was the enterprise restaurant business, which we can dive into. So that's a little bit of my story. Is that helpful? I mean, it's it's not glamorous. There's a bunch of lessons embedded in there. My favorite one
Yeah.
is especially on the just when folks are trying to find their way, you kind of like there's nobody is going to there's a lot of folks that we know, especially that go to great universities that have always gotten the yes because they are incredibly, incredibly talented people. And I think I was very fortunate early in my career to get 15 no's and then 16 no's. And then on the 17th, finally a yes
Yeah.
for a job that eventually kind of taught me everything I know
Yeah.
now. So
I knew that you'd always want to land potentially back in venture. Maybe that's off the table now, but at least for a while. But I didn't know that you got rejected 15 times, 16, and
yeah,
then on the 17th, that's
yeah.
crazy. Like I would say, like
Right.
given your trajectory and the trajectory of DoorDash.
Airbnb, they all said no. And I also do think there's, for whatever it's worth, there was something or someone watching out for me because the company culture that DoorDash is was and continues to be, I very much aligned with. And so
Yeah,
I think that was also very lucky. I
yeah,
I don't think I would have had the same kind of run or career at any other company.
yeah, yeah. Well, we'll come back to DoorDash in just a second, but maybe at the outset here, I think it'd be interesting given your, I mean, very impressive trajectory. You're now a VP of ads. Correct me if I'm wrong at DoorDash. I've been there for 9 years, as you mentioned. I was recently at a company called Kite, and 2 years ago, you came on to
Yeah.
our breakfast, dinner, and learn, and you shared some of your insights with the entire company. Um, and I think you talked a lot about, you gave really good advice for people kind of earlier in their careers. And I think maybe now it'd be really interesting if we could start with that. What piece of advice or pieces of advice would you give to folks who are maybe yourself at 25, just getting started?
The first thing I would say is finding a job, starting your career is one of the hardest moments. 22, 25, restarting is one of the hardest things to do. You have this massive ocean of things in front of you. You don't really know what it is that you were meant to do for the most part. Everybody has this like, that person in your class, the iconoclast who's always starting companies, knew they were going to be a senator from growing up, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's the rest of us. And the rest of us kind of don't really know what we should do. And so the first thing I would just acknowledge to most folks is it is okay to feel lost because that is the majority of us. The second thing I would say is the only way I know how to solve feeling lost is getting up, putting on one shoe at a time, and solving the problem that's immediately in front of us. Kind of like as an entrepreneur that Eric, when you're starting a company, you're trying to find product market fit. Just staying up in the high level strategy of the world is unhelpful. You have to get into the mud. And the only way to get into the mud is just to start and like walk out the door and start doing something. My equivalent for that was again applying 15 times, getting rejected, and then applying 3 more. And so it was really the only span of control that I thought. Once you're kind of find your way or you are in a job, then my thought shifts. Obviously work your tush off, which means you have to love what you do. But the other thing that I think is an undervalued thing is sticking to things that you believe intuitively and that you're really, really great at. Some people call this a superpower. Other people call this, that's what our founder CEO calls it, a superpower. Some of this is just like what your skill set is. But if I kind of look at my career naturally, and it'll naturally happen to you, even if you don't want it to happen, is, I woke up not wanting to be in sales. 9 months into DoorDash, I was in sales. And that's not a mistake. It's just what I was good at. And what I kind of describe to people as when your back's against the wall or when you're on your back foot or when you're trying to do something really well, what do you go to? What is the thing you lean on? What is the skill set you lean on? That is your superpower. You can also ask your friends and family, what is my superpower? They often know better than you. But
Mm.
if you just kind of double click on that thing and continuously do it, it will lead you down a very, very, very great career path because you're doing the thing that's natural to you that feels like magic to everyone else. And
Yeah.
if you don't do that, if you're not in your magic moment every single day, there's no way you can have a top 0.001% career. It's just impossible because the people that are in that sort of flow are doing exactly what they were meant to do. And I think there is one hard truth here, which is um, it your folks that fall in love with their superpower and love doing it are even can have an even faster and better and longer career. Um, there are many, many people that don't love what they're great at.
Yeah.
But if you want to be successful, you still have to do the thing, right?
In some ways, it reminds me of like this thing that I've heard, which is, when you're doing performance reviews, oftentimes you have strengths and weaknesses, and you should definitely work on fixing your weaknesses. But actually, some counterintuitive advice that I've heard, which I really like, is push those aside, like double down on your strengths. And I think that's another way of saying what you're
Totally.
saying, which is that. So cool. Well, we've got a packed docket. Let's kind of keep moving forward here. I want to maybe we're here ultimately to talk about B2B to B, B2B to C product market fit. We wanted to
Yeah.
spend a little bit of time diving deep into that. Before we go into that, I just have one quick question, which is maybe you can share an anecdote or two. I know that because, as you mentioned, we're friends and we've talked about this offline. There were a few big moments for you that led to some big outcomes for you, but also importantly for DoorDash. If to the extent you're able to share, I'd be super interested to learn about maybe one of those moments that might have led to like an inflection point or a step function, kind of some outcome for DoorDash.
For better or for worse, and everybody learns differently. The way I have learned, as you can kind of tell that first initial DoorDash story, is I get a burning thing in my gut where it's basically my friends and family would describe it as I'm just generally upset. And I can't really explain exactly why. And it normally has to do with something that I see that other people don't see. So
Mhm.
in the example of me applying to DoorDash, it was I feel that if there is anyone that can communicate with restaurants in this country, it's
Yeah,
probably me better than anybody else. And the fact that you, Mr. and Mrs. DoorDash hiring manager, don't see that means that you're
yeah,
wrong. And I
right.
will just keep coming back until you see what I see.
Yep.
Um, the second one for me was actually our enterprise restaurant business. So at DoorDash, if you think about the marketplace, we have the SMB, small, medium-sized business, your local taco shop that's on the DoorDash marketplace. And 9 years ago, most of the food restaurant delivery providers focused on SMBs. Caviar went after high-end restaurants. Seamless was just in New York. They went after the kind of creme de la creme or the SMB restaurant that worked on this. The other type of restaurant is enterprise restaurants, Chick-fil A, McDonald's, Cheesecake Factory, et cetera.
Right.
And so when I was about a year into Dash and I was kind of in a job, I was managing and running our menu team, which anybody now
Okay.
that knows me would laugh out the door, the fact that I was managing an operational team in Phoenix on how to turn on menus. And it wasn't going super well. The other thing that I was running was I was the first enterprise account manager for Buca di Beppo, which is
Yep.
a wonderful Italian place that has probably 15 locations. And the amazing assistant catering manager wouldn't answer my phone calls. So that was my two jobs. One job trying to get menus up, one job trying to do enterprise. And I called. I had a fancy title, head of enterprise something or other. It was a fancy title, but I was basically just doing these two things. My boss called me one day and said, "You don't have to do menus anymore. You don't get to do menus anymore." And I was absolutely crushed. It was like the worst moment of my career. Talk about being in a place where I thought I'm the creme de la creme. I'm doing so well in my career, and you're taking something away from me. The
Right.
emotion of getting something taken away from you is really, really tough. And so I spiraled, and all the expletives of this taking this from me and blah, blah, blah. And everybody will go through this in their career. And if they don't, that means they're actually probably not taking enough risk in their career. So everyone
Yeah.
will feel at some point in time. The flip side was now I had this enterprise restaurant business and I had one customer and then I added two customers. So I called her every day. Eventually she said, "Okay, fine, Toby, I'll give you the restaurant." So I got 15 Buca di Beppos. So my percentage of our DoorDash business went from 3% to 3.3%. Then the next day I got PF Chang's as a customer, and it went from 3 to 4 to 5. And every day I added another enterprise restaurant partner until at the end of this whole story, I had a 150 person team, $1 billion in revenue, 70% of DoorDash's business before it went public. So the story there is like
Yeah.
I got
Amazing.
completely annihilated. I got totally let down. And then I was focusing on something that was totally in my superpower and control, which was just calling restaurants, getting them to feel good about themselves, explaining what DoorDash was in an era where they didn't really truly understand, empathizing with them, and then eventually becoming important within the organization. But there were 3 years where I wasn't important. This is the other thing. A lot of people in their careers, one lesson here is too, if you are on the main thing, if you get placed on the main thing, that's awesome. But most of us don't get to be on the main thing. So the question is, how do you create the main thing? And it takes a lot of deep conviction to just get there. The flip is you just put your head down and do the thing you're good at. So that was one I would say is doing the enterprise restaurant business that created a stepping stone. And then the second was I really wanted to be a general management, closer to product and engineering. And so I had a decision to make within the DoorDash ecosystem. Our great founder and CEO, Tony, and my old boss, Christopher Payne, sat me down and said, okay, you can give up this enterprise restaurant business and you can start a new product or thing within DoorDash. What do you want to do? And I said, ads. And they all looked at me like I was crazy because 5 years ago, Amazon had an ad business, but it wasn't $45 billion in revenue.
Yeah.
And retail media networks were not really a thing. And so they said, okay, I guess this isn't that risky of a proposition. I gave my 150 person team away to an incredible woman who now leads it. And I started with just me again. And that was probably the second major.
Amazing. I mean, we could probably do a whole podcast on just your insights, your enterprise sales insights. Like, how did you go from one to
Totally.
150 and 70% of revenue? But we'll move on. That's amazing. Really, really impressive. So if we go pivot towards B2B to C product market fit, maybe we can start with just like 101. What is it? How would you define it? Because I mean, I think it's a term people throw around, but maybe not everybody knows exactly what it means.
There's kind of two types of, there's meta, a couple large businesses, right? So you have a consumer-led business where businesses are selling to consumers, B to C. You have B2B businesses, a business is selling to a business, or selling to businesses. And then B to B to C, which is selling a product to a business to ultimately sell to a customer or a consumer. And so a lot of this, like marketplaces, like Dash, in some way, Dash is a three-sided marketplace. We have Dashers, we have merchants, we have consumers. We had to bring merchants onto the platform in order for consumers to find it interesting, to create a flywheel effect to drive growth. So we had to create a business, a B2B relationship with restaurants to create a B2B2C relationship with consumers. If you just kind of double click on how to do these things,
Yeah.
there are a bunch of businesses where if you partner, there are a bunch of marketplace businesses where if you partner with one side of the marketplace, basically it kind of creates a deeper level, a deeper flywheel that you can then go leverage to build the other side of the marketplace. So in our instance, it was helping restaurants enter into the digital realm. Again, go back to 2015. 2015, crazy enough to say this, many of the restaurants initially that I sold didn't have Wi-Fi, right? So you're in this ecosystem, let alone a digital ecosystem or an app or a website. They didn't have freaking Wi-Fi. And then you had to go in and provide them with a tablet that had LTE. And so being able to
Yep.
explain to a merchant how to kind of bring you into the digital ecosystem, the convenience economy, was a huge sales motion within itself. Once you had the merchants on the platform, then consumers would show up. Consumers didn't just naturally show up and then all of a sudden we could go get restaurants. And so that sort of motion or movement is somewhat of a difficult one, especially with entrepreneurs, because you have to kind of like, you have to dream a little bit and you have to nail one side of it in order for the flywheel to kick off. So anyways, that's a little bit of the description and
Yeah, I mean, it's inherently more complex than if you're just talking about like a B2B or B2C context because just the number of parties. And one thing that I think a lot about, and maybe there's something here, which is incentive alignment. Because when I was building my startup Allocate, there's some early issues with respect to just misaligned incentives that it was like hitting our heads against the wall every day. And it wasn't until we kind of aligned incentives that things got a lot easier. So I'm
yeah.
thinking, you mentioned you have actually like four parties if you include DoorDash, right? You have DoorDash, the merchants, the customers, the dashers. And I'm just curious, like, does that come up in conversations or early days? Like, do you think a lot about incentive alignment?
Yeah, it's a really thoughtful question. The way that I think about this is in terms of time scale. So if you're at um once you have found product market fit and something is starting to work, there's some simple, and let me just take a step back and talk about when I say product market fit. When I say product market fit, it means that in my head, it means that an army could be whatever size you want, 20 people, 100 people, 200 people, can can take what it is that we have and sell it, and consumers can consume it like it's a racetrack, meaning that you do not have to lay any incremental steps or cookie crumbs for them to understand the proposition.
Yeah,
It is something that is moving, and that is a different definition than product market fit for a lot of people. A lot of folks will say, I found product market fit. I found that consumers want this sort of motion. Consumers want discounts when they go into a restaurant, let's say, for example. Okay, great. That's a consumer problem you have solved. That is not product market fit. You have solved a piece of the risk equation over time
right.
to find product market fit. So once you find product market fit and you can command a small little army to do what it is that you want to do in a very simple fashion, then you're absolutely right. Incentives in that moment have to be aligned between stakeholders. Because if they're not, what you'll eventually lead to is some sort of misalignment, and you can have a like a negative compounding problem at some point. Up until
Mm,
that point, I'm actually a big believer that you can take each one of these pieces independent of each other and work the problem. So what I mean by that is, let's take let's say the original DoorDash proposition. You can go out and you can find, in absent of everything else, hey, restaurant, if I send you incremental customers, that's an assumption number one. And those customers order when you don't have a peak hours, assumption number two. Will you accept my orders at this percent commission? And the
yeah,
short answer is most likely yes, right? So you kind of bring the problem down. Now we have a problem though. Let's go to the consumer side. Consumers don't like ordering on off-peak hours, right?
right.
Once they
Yeah,
start ordering from a restaurant, they will probably continue ordering from that restaurant. So they become less and less incremental over time. Those are
sure.
two huge, massive incentive misalignment problems that have to be solved. But we can get to the first core solution set before we have to get to the incentive misalignment thing. But you're absolutely right. Without solving that, you won't have a massive business or great consumer
Right.
proposition.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, so as we're talking about product market fit, DoorDash didn't start with product market fit. I don't think most businesses don't. It's a journey to find it. Um, it feels I don't know too much about the business, but it feels like what DoorDash is today is sort of what it set out to be when it was founded. I know there's this famous YC application video. I imagine it's quite similar, but curious if there are any fun stories you can share around the path to product market fit, any interesting pivots that were taken that maybe the general population might not know about.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take I will I'll take well I'll take one, which is the initial marketplace. Adding enterprise restaurant partners was a huge difference that a lot of folks in the marketplace world across the globe eventually followed us into. Add McDonald's, add Chick-fil A, etc. So that was one, which I think was a misunderstood opportunity set. Suburban markets for us was also a completely misunderstood opportunity set.
Right. Yeah.
Which kind of that in combination with enterprise restaurants, because enterprise restaurants do very well in suburban markets, kind of led to
Yeah.
Dash. our story here in the US. Um,
Yeah.
but that and then the story of our business is that every X amount of time and over time the number has increased. We double down and scale a new business.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of just finding ideas, product market fit, cooking around in the kitchen, a bunch of crazy things we throw at the wall. Some of those do well, some of those don't do well. When they start to do well, we have a process by which we invest in them, continue to invest in them, and then eventually we launch a new business. DoorDash today, when I started was a one market, one it was a one market marketplace restaurant business. Today we are a restaurant, a global, so across 30 countries, not just in 7 markets in the US, a global restaurant marketplace, yes, delivery marketplace, but also have pickup, um, uh, where we also now 20% of our users are ordering outside of restaurants. So a massive new vertical business. So grocery, convenience, retail,
Yeah.
it has
Right.
grown. That's a 3-year-old business with a huge retail media network, which is a 2-year-old business, and a merchant
Yeah.
services product that powers a lot of things. And so every X amount of
Right.
time, we launch a new product. So our finding new product market fit is eternal.
So experimentation is sort of like the DNA, the culture at DoorDash, and that leads to these new. They're kind of like little pivots in a way, right? That lead to some unlock, and then that
Totally.
continues to layer on
Totally.
and lead
Because
to
you have,
impressive growth.
I think one of my hypotheses for why the best companies in Silicon Valley, and frankly, the best companies in the world, you look at LVMH or any of these companies, have a
Sure.
core set of people that have been there for a very long time, is not because those people are a club and blah, blah, blah. It is actually because there are very few people that have seen the world change really, really fast altogether.
Yeah.
So if you are with a group of 5, 10, 15, 20 people that you've grown up with at DoorDash that are some of my best friends, and all of you saw us go from 10,000 deliveries on a Friday to over 2 billion deliveries in a year, you now believe the acorn can be a redwood.
Hmm.
And you believe that over and over and over again. And so you'll constantly together be looking for those opportunities. Most businesses are never there. And so the flip is a business where it's stasis and someone approaches and says, I think if I have an idea to 10x our business in the next 3 years, who's going to believe you? So that sort of DNA is very, very rare, which is again why I think the best businesses have them, because the best businesses are not a sole thing. They're layer cakes over time.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So DoorDash, like Uber, like Instacart, sort of. I don't know if you've heard this framing, but sort of famously operates in like bits and atoms, right? Like software
Yep.
and like the real world. Um, just curious your take on this is related to product market fit, maybe it's not, but what are the pros and cons of operating a business that's not, pure software?
Everything one invests in, dollars and cents, has a payback period. The best investors understand that framework and they live by it everywhere. What do I mean by that? This house has a payback period. A restaurant has a payback period. A piece of hardware has a payback period. A group of customers has a payback period. You don't have to be really, really great at understanding payback periods because you get a little bit of, you get a little bit of wiggle room in your margin to mess around with these things. Atoms, you have to be really, really, really dialed to dollars in the ground. When are those dollars going to pay back? And if it's some sort of machinery, is the machinery going to have issues, right? I think it's an absolute blessing to be raised in the atoms part of the world, because now everything we look at looks like a payback period and everything else looks like a gravy payback period to us.
Yeah.
And so, as we expand into things like ads and as we expand into things like other software services, it gives us a nice mental model for ways to expand. So that's I think that's the way that DoorDash looks at it. The way that from an investment framework perspective. The way we look at it just from like a customer perspective is it's all things are equal. In the sense that I think there's a lot of technology companies, and this is like it's a known. Many technology companies in Silicon Valley were started product out, and they still are product out, and you see this all over the place. There are very few companies that are customer in. We are one of those companies, and so whether the customer in means the customer wants a solution that includes just bits, or the customer needs a solution that includes atoms, we are not afraid of either. We look at them as tools in a toolkit to solve a problem. So yeah. And then if you want to get super philosophical about it,
let's go there.
Everybody today, when we started this, everyone would say the atoms world is, the atoms world. It takes so much money.
Investors sort of
it's never going to pay itself back. And what a horrible business. All those things have proven to be false.
Right.
And now, full circle, everyone says, oh, well, all of your moat is in your atoms.
Right.
And so probably neither of those things are true. The truth is probably somewhere in between, which is really just any sort of defensibility comes from having an incredible customer relationship that pays you a lot of money. And so it's a very, very scary thing. But at the fundamental level, it's all about understanding a customer. And just if you get back to that mentality, don't get lost in the math, don't get lost in the fancy dancy new thing and the big presentation by somebody at the big conference. Just go back and ask yourself the question: what customer problem are they solving? If you follow that train back, it's very easy to understand. And frankly, then all the mystification goes away, and anyone should be able to build a business. So,
Toby, we're getting to the end here. Just we're going to do a quick fire if you're game for it, and then finally one last question I ask all of my interviewees. So let's jump in. Sound good?
Yep, let's do it.
All right. So first of the quick fire. So you're normally based in San Francisco. What's your favorite burrito in San Francisco?
Taco.
Oh,
taco.
In the marina. Okay, I usually call it taco, but taco. Maybe that's how the locals call it. Taco.
Yeah. And then the best in New York is electric burrito.
Okay. That's a good taco, however it's pronounced, is a solid choice. I'm a fan. Most underrated travel destination?
Montana.
God's country.
What
more?
You see the skies.
Yeah.
Everything's beautiful. If it's raining, it's beautiful. If it's sunny, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. Montana.
Yeah. I don't know if you know, but this podcast is sort of fly fishing inspired. And so there's plenty of fly fishing up in Montana.
There you go. That's perfect.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Time until we have robots in our houses doing our dishes and our laundry. How many years?
Cheeky answer. We already have robots in our houses doing our laundry. It's called a dishwasher and a
fair.
Whatever. What do you call it? Yeah. Dishwasher. So then the question is putting them in.
Right. Humanoid robot, right? Kind of like your custom, at-home butler, if you will.
I'm going with for the initial innovators, 5 years.
5 years. Wow.
But my prediction is it never hits mass.
Okay. Never happens.
It's unhuman. And I don't think people are going to do it.
Okay. It's weird to have a robot in your house doing your laundry and dishes and other household
chores. It's weird
chores.
having a humanoid. Maybe I'm getting stuck on your humanoid portion.
Right. Okay.
I think the biggest mistake that all of these folks have made is they are building a robot that looks like a human. Like, just build it that makes it look something that I don't. It's the strange thing.
I get it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we want the humanoid form? Maybe not. Yeah. Last quick fire is, I guess, a little bit more intellectual, which is what book or piece of content has most changed your thoughts or kind of how you work? Yeah.
It's a book. Probably many people recommend it. It's a book called The Outsiders.
Yeah.
About I think it's the top 8 unconventional CEOs that return the most. And it basically goes through and it talks about capital allocation in its highest form and how CEOs and investors are basically kind of the same thing. And they talk about how these great people build wonderful businesses and some of the values that they have.
Yeah, I read it a long time ago. Great. I agree. Great book. Okay, cool. Well, last question here. As I mentioned, Uh, well, this is the Steelhead podcast, and it's a question I ask everybody who comes on. Steelhead is a metaphor for the difficulties involved with company building and investing. It takes a long time, but it's a lot of effort, very hard, as I'm sure you can attest to being at DoorDash for 9 years. But the payoff, if it works, is like so worth it, right? And so, kind of, I guess, turning that into a question: what is your personal Steelhead goal in life? It can be professional, it can be personal. To kind of finish that, it's something that's very hard, will take a lot of time, but will be worth it in the end.
Mine is more people oriented. So,
Yeah.
I started off by talking about the traditional build versus sale thing that a lot of people, there's so many podcasts that I've heard this mental model of build. There's people that build things in Silicon Valley, and there's people that sell things in Silicon
Okay.
Valley. And you're
Yeah.
either an engineer and you build it, or you're a salesperson, you sell it. I think that mental model is great early in one's career to try to help people understand where they should try to spend their time. Um, but I think the actual most important thing in building a company in Silicon Valley and in life is actually the connective tissue between the two. And what that effectively means is, are you good at interpreting from sales, which is customer, to engineering, which is build? And that sort of communication layer is critical for everything
Yeah.
being built. The end output of this, which now, when I say it seems like normal, is the highest paid people in Silicon Valley are product managers and general managers. And those two sets of people, all they do every single day is interpret from the customer to people building products. So that I think is the most valuable thing, that type of skill set. And in particular for me, if you look at, there are people that are very good at that. They understand what consumers want and build into. And it's not easier, but because we are all consumers, we can kind of internalize things better. My big belief is that there are so many unbuilt businesses for businesses because the translation layer is much harder. It's much harder to train people to understand the translation layer from what a business customer needs to what they need to build.
Yeah.
And so my whole thing that I love doing every day and that I want to continue doing until I retire is helping people understand and learn how to build that skill set for B2B customers. And if we're able to do that, the world that we live in will be a much, 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 much better, more equal place, because the end outcome is you won't have massive tech fiefdoms that run the world and consumer eyeballs that they monetize. You'll actually just have a very, very distributed economy, much like we've had for a long period of time here in the US, where small businesses reign supreme. So
Love that. That's a very unique response. I'm a huge fan of that one. Thanks so much for coming on, Toby. Really appreciate it.
fun. It's a blast.